Hello there, virtual Space Hero community. Welcome to our this week's live stream. And again, we are picking up on a question being brought to us by you. And I'm really happy because we have been talking about many ways on how to implement, on how to work on a strategy about hybrid work. But sometimes we forget a little bit to think about what are really the things why it doesn't work. So we do know that hybrid work is really a complex thing. We also do know that many organizations have been hybrid for many years. So learning from them why hybrid largely doesn't work and maybe what they have done to make it work, that is what we're going to discuss today. And I'm super excited today. I have Sarah Hawley connecting from the United States here. She's the CEO and founder of Grow Motely and herself a remote worker. So Sarah, welcome on the Virtual Space Hero stage. Hi.
Hi, how are you? Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for making time in your calendar. I know that you're super busy as a remote work expert. I see you on many stages of different remote work events. Sarah and me, Sarah, should we disclose a secret? Because we're not only both of us virtual enthusiasts, both of us, we're sharing a 1-year-old other secret together.
Yeah, 1-year-old baby
We
boys.
we have both 1-year-old baby boys. There are only a few days from each other. The only thing that I think a big difference is that I have sort of a battlefield during lunch, which is now my time here. And apparently Sarah's boy is a good eater. So I'm really lucky for you because that takes a lot of my time after lunch to clean up everything.
Yeah. Well, not always, but we're doing okay.
Sarah, thanks so much again. And I would love to start with a question. Do you still remember your first virtual meeting? Can you recall that? Can you recall when you started working as a remote worker and how was that virtual meeting?
Yeah, actually, I can't remember the first exact meeting, but I remember my first hire that I made. I hired a financial controller, Michelle, still a dear friend of mine from the Philippines. And so I remember the early meetings that I had with her. I was still in an office and she was the one that was remote. And that was in the period where we were starting to explore this idea of being able to hire people everywhere in the world. And we spent about a year in this kind of hybrid state. And that's where I get my perspective from, that it doesn't work that well. It didn't work that well for us. But yeah, I remember that early stages with her, and I loved it. I mean, it was blowing my mind how much we were able to connect and explore and grow together and achieve as a company with someone who was located in another country. It was great.
Wow. So also just to think about, you were saying it largely doesn't work. So let's jump into the topic and let's hear a little bit from you. I also mentioned a few factors that in literature and in my practice I see are super important, like culture, connection, creativity. We have communication, collaboration issues. What is it that you experience in your work, also with Grow Motely, that we're going to dive into what you're doing with your organization? What is it? What inhibits a great hybrid or virtual work experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, what I was just referring to was back in 2014. That's when I first made the move to this remote work and remote companies. And, we were hybrid for about a year while we started building our team out internationally. And then we moved into co-working spaces with the local team, and that worked better than the office plus only, like office only and remote only people. Then we had this co-working space where people kind of would come and go who were still based in the same city. And then within about a year, 18 months, it got to the point where like people didn't even really want to use the co-working space. And so, we got rid of that altogether. And this was a previous company I owned, but I've been remote since 2014, since about 2015. Halfway through the year-ish, all of my team members were completely remote after that point. And at this point, I wouldn't go back to an office or a hybrid environment. And the main thing that I found was a disjoint or almost like two cultures would form within the company. So the people who were getting to spend physical time together every day had their kind of unique cadences and rhythms and little cultural norms, and then the people who were always remote, had their own. So I think there's a lot of different, like hybrid kind of is a broad definition, right? Like it could be that everybody is located in the same city and they come to the office sometimes, sometimes not. And that would be like a slightly different dynamic to what we had, where we had some concentration in a city based on our history. And then we had like all this new talent coming in from all over the world. So that was very different. So I think there's like different definitions of what hybrid is, and it's very broad. And that's why I say, it didn't work for us. We didn't enjoy it. I think the culture was better when we were all in office, and then was remarkably better when we were all remote. And the bit in the middle was actually like the bigger struggle. And even a simple example is things like having a team meeting where you've got a room of people looking at a computer and then a bunch of people on computer, like on their own screens. It's, there's some side chat that happens in the room where there's people in a room. And so, there are just like little aspects that start to become more challenging, and people end up left out of things because not everybody is communicating in the same way and flow and cadence. But I think there are other things to consider as well, is why are you choosing hybrid, and is it what you and your team really want and need, or is there another driver there that might be to do with an office lease that is still in place for a couple of years, don't want to waste, or a fear of, really letting go of control? Like, what is the actual need? And obviously some companies have a need for some people to be in office, like, or in a physical location. Maybe it's manufacturing or something. And in that case, like, that is the option. Like, it has to be. So really, like, does it have to be? Is it truly desired by everyone? Like, what are the reasons driving the decision for hybrid? I think is important to consider.
That's also something we discussed quite in depth with Lina Morkbach here as well. We talked about what are the different versions of remote and why you choose them. Absolutely. Let me ask you a question. So when we talk about hybrid, and we do know hybrid meetings are the most difficult ones. So virtual meetings or in-person meetings, but hybrid is like very difficult to get a good participation, a good feeling, a good engagement of those on-site and on those virtually. But if we look at it from a broader perspective and we say like, well, okay, hybrid work, or the future of work is choice. So I want my employees to be able to work from wherever they are and whenever it is they're most productive, right? So let's assume there are, of course, people who want to go to the office. So that would mean that you still offer some sort of office space, whether it's your own headquarters or whether it's a co-working area that you sort of rent. Wouldn't you agree that some sort of headquarters or office space would be necessary if we want to provide everyone with the flexibility to choose?
Well, the thing that I would throw out to consider of that is like, why is that your problem to solve? Why not empower your individual team members to create the environment that works best for them? And if they desire to work in a co-working space, they can go and do that. You don't need to necessarily organize that for them. I mean, the idea of a HQ only really works if everybody is located in the same physical area. Otherwise, you have a HQ that no one can really access. So I think it depends on the distribution of the team. One of the things that I love about remote work is being able to work in a fully globally distributed team and having the entire world as kind of our talent pool. Like, that's very appealing to me. I love to travel. I've spent my adult life traveling. I've lived in many, many cities and countries around the world and kind of want to continue to do so. So for me, there's a real advantage of bringing this diverse pool of talent into my company, and it's very enjoyable for me as well. I think there's huge advantages from a business perspective. But I think that's the question as well, of like whether if you as a company would have office space, that really only is relevant if everybody's in the same location. And then if you're talking about co-working, I think, can we create empowered solutions for individuals to choose whether it's co-working or it's a cafe, or, they can choose that for themselves as well, versus you needing to solve it for them necessarily.
That's a good point, because probably even when we talk about choosing the co-working, there might be sort of preferences. If we look at our employees, and even then there could be one, if they choose their co-working on their own, they might be sort of more satisfied, happier because they find a co-working that is closer to wherever they live or
Yeah.
farther away from
And are
wherever
they
they live,
looking for
or has a different
co-working that's
distribution.
like big open room, open plan, or are they looking to have a little office in a larger co-working center? Like, what are they actually looking for? What are their needs? And it's not as simple as just being like, okay, you go here every day now. We found it for you.
Yeah. So coming back again, it's all about choice. So future of work is choice. Also the choice maybe of if there is a physical location that you're able to choose that physical location. I have an Austrian company that I'm working with, and what I really like about their approach is they're just distributed in Austria. And Austria is a very small country in the middle of Europe, and for them it's very easy that they have, for example, they are organizing like monthly or maybe every 2 months they are rotating and having organized co-workings in the different regions.
Oh,
And
I love that.
sometimes people from other regions are coming or not coming because we're really small. So it's like a 3 hour train ride from the west to the middle of Austria. And therefore that really works good, like sort of pop-up co-workings for the
Yeah.
company so that they also connect with each other beyond the annual retreat, of course, that they are organizing as well.
Yeah, I love that. I had 3 of my team members last week all got a Airbnb together in Mexico City and co-worked and co-lived together for a week. That was really cool. And now one of them has actually flown to Europe and is staying with another one of our team members in Romania for a little while. And so they're co-living and co-working together. And I mean, this is stuff that they've chosen to do that feels good for them. It's not something that I, as the leader of the company, needed to organize or what have you. So I think really giving people that freedom and empowerment to do what feels good for them and to create a working environment and experiences that are exciting for them.
I love that. Great approach. And also, of course, this creates different bonds again between the different team members. I love the approach. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. With Grow Motely, I'm just coming back a little bit now also to your organization, to your company. Grow Motely is a remote worker platform. And you sort of also claim on the webpage, I have looked at it again before, to find your dream job, to discover remote companies that are a perfect match for who you really are. And Grow Remotely, what is the need that you're solving? There have been quite a lot remote work platforms. What makes you different, and what is it? When did you start it? Let us know a little bit about the background, please.
For sure. I mean, I think what's most exciting about remote work and working in this kind of way, anywhere work, distributed work, is the opportunity for individuals to find their dream job, to find the company where they feel most aligned, they care the most about what that company does, they want to show up in that same way, whatever the company's values and culture is. The world is your oyster in terms of finding that company. And likewise, on the company side, as a founder myself, what I love to do is be able to go out to the entire world and find the people who love what we do that much, that they want to show up every day and be a part of the journey. And my talent pool is not limited to, and on the other side for individuals, they're not limited to only the companies in their local area that they can go and work with. So that's really the premise behind Grow Remotely, is helping companies and people find each other where there is alignment and there is a culture fit. And we in particular cater toward people and leaders of companies who are focused on the evolution of company culture, more toward, they understand the importance of it. They understand the importance of bringing more consciousness to the culture, more intention. And so really seeing that as kind of the future of work, where it's an empowered, trusted place to come and work together. I think we're a different, I mean, there's a lot of technology evolving in the remote workspace, but I don't know that there's really any other place where you actually go to find talent and then be able to onboard them and hire them and then use our culture tools on an ongoing basis. So from a company side, we plug in as an end-to-end piece of HR technology, from posting the job to managing your application pipeline to making a hire to doing all your monthly payroll. And then we have a lot of culture tools and we have professional development that we offer, masterclasses and benefits and everything that we offer to your team. So I don't think there's really anyone doing exactly what we do from that perspective. I would see us more as an evolution of the gig marketplaces, Upwork, Freelancer, Fiverr, that kind of thing. We are like that, but for long-term permanent positions and with this focus on culture matching.
Oh, fantastic. And when we talk about culture matching, do you have your own tool in place to match the individual with or the applicant with the organization? What are you using there?
Yeah, so right now, when a company sets up their profile on our platform, they put in their values, their vision, and their purpose. So that's all accessible on their page, so that when you're applying for a job with them, you can go and read about the company and how they actually operate. Over time, we are building a culture matching algorithm using some of that data and then the data that we know about the individuals and helping them to match and find each other. That's further down the track. Growmotely's only been around for just under a year, actually. April last year, we went live. So it's something we're working toward. We're doing it as best we can right now through our marketing and our content and the way we communicate and the way we allow companies and people to communicate with each other. But over time, we see this to be the place where people can kind of sign on and actually see best fit companies and best fit individuals.
There has been quite a discussion about best fit or culture fit in terms of regards to diversity. So, of course, and also I was a researcher for many years, and of course, I understand why we look for culture fit in terms of same communication patterns, values, blah, blah, blah. But of course, there will be less friction, less diversity in opinions if we are looking for too much culture fit. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and I understand that perspective. But I think what culture fit means to me, what I truly think it is understanding what's important to us as a company, what are our values that we live by, and how we like to show up for each other, and then going out to the world and being open to who might fit into that. That is very different to the culture of one's family of origin or the culture of one's nation where they grew up or where they live, or city or location. But I understand at a surface level, if we say culture fit, it can sound like I'm looking for people just like me. But no, I mean, and Growmotely is a great example. We know our values and what we stand for and how we show up so well that we're able to talk with different people from all over the world and understand if this is a place where they'll thrive. And we have enormous diversity where 25 people across 13 countries, 67% female. Our age range spans 30 years from our youngest to our oldest team member. So we're constantly very focused on creating more diversity, but it's still important that we care about the thing that we're working on. Like, why would anyone want to work in a company where they don't care about what the company does anyway? So that's kind of still part of what I see as culture alignment, that the culture of our company is that we care about the future of work. We want to redefine work for humanity. This is why we show up every day. So we want to find people that resonate with that and agree with that. And then we have our values like trust and empowerment, transparency, curiosity. And so those are things that we're looking for that can and do exist in every culture, in every background, in every socioeconomic stretch. They're just things that are important to us. And if that's not the way you like to work, you won't be happy at Growmotely. It's got nothing to do with where you went to school or what color your skin is or where you grew up or what have you. But the other part of it is not necessarily discounting people. I think it's staying open within the interview process, but that cultural framework of like who our company is and how we operate helps us navigate things moving forward. If somebody is really struggling to show up in that way, we can have an open conversation and just be like, hey, this is really important to us and it feels like it's hard for you. And that's not right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. There's no flexible is right and structured is wrong, or structured is right and flexible is wrong. It's just kind of two ends of a spectrum. And where do you fit as a company and where do you fit as an individual? And if you're both more toward the flexible side, then it's probably going to work. But if you're at opposite ends of the spectrum, a fast growing startup like Growmotely, perhaps as an example, wouldn't be the best fit for somebody who previously thrived in, say, a military environment where there's very clear pathways and frameworks and service standards to follow, or SOPs. Like, if there's so much structure, and then Grammarly is a startup, it just might be really difficult if somebody thrives in that level of structure. Neither is right or wrong. It's just how you're going to thrive. So I think it's really an important point to still keep an open mind and be aware of where there might be blind spots. But I think mostly what it's coming down to is understanding, like, at our core as a company, who are we and how do we find people that will thrive in that environment?
Thanks so much for sharing, and also for making clear the difference between culture fit, how it could look like on the surface, and how you see it as a tool for matching organizations and applicants. Fantastic. Sarah, let's go back a little bit. So we talked at the beginning already about why hybrid work largely doesn't work and what you can do about it. You gave us a few examples. For example, we talked about the topic of meetings and people feeling left out, particularly those who were virtual. What are other reasons? For example, when we look at collaboration or communication, what do you think are other options, other points there?
Well, I think the main thing is, if you are going to have a hybrid workforce, either if you have to or you've decided this is the right fit, is then figuring out, well, how do we make this work that we have a fairly streamlined experience for everyone. So the example of meetings would be one where doing the 5 people in a room together and 5 people on the screen alone wherever they are is not going to work very well. So if you are hybrid, maybe that meeting that you have every week, everyone just dials in. Nobody is in a room together. And that means we're all having the same experience. So we're not kind of creating a distraction or a difference in experience that can lead to, further, like, this divide between how we operate. The same thing would be for, like, when are we actually doing collaborative brainstorming? And if as a company we decide that we really value doing that in person, then putting together some form of regular meetup where you bring people in to do that. And if you're fully globally distributed, that might be something that happens once a year or twice a year. If you're kind of doing a hybrid thing where you have a HQ and everybody is from the same physical region, and they're just allowed to come and go as they please or whatever, maybe you have a monthly day where you all come together and brainstorm and collaborate, or weekly or something like that. But I think finding these, like, central points where we come together and move the needle forward and creating a unified experience in that moment versus a hybrid experience in that moment, because I think that's where the disruption comes. And then I do think there needs to be more intention around, in particular, if you have, like, if hybrid for you means half of your team are doing one thing and half are doing something different, there needs to be intention around how we bridge the gaps between those two people. So making sure that people who are remote are working with people who are local. So we're not having the local team and the remote team, because then we really start to develop different cultures. If the hybrid scenario is just, like, more freedom and flexibility around a single office location, I think there are some easier things to do there around bringing people together. But we still have to be careful and intentional around understanding, like, if the scenario is we allow people to work from the office or from home, we have to be mindful of what norms develop that may leave people feeling guilty, or like they're unsure if they're doing the right or the wrong thing. Like, they're told they don't have to come to the office, but then they see, like, everybody else comes at least one day a week, and then they start thinking, well, should I? Do I have to? Like, really being aware of these different things that can come up for people, and, like, airing those conversations and being as a leader, making sure people know what is okay and what's not. We don't have these unspoken norms that we're not going to speak about, but we're going to judge you on them. Like, that's not healthy,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a very important point that you mentioned, well, a few very important points, but particularly the last one, just to pick up on that. And I talked with a colleague about that, and with an organization that we're working with, is if all important decisions are always taken in the headquarters, in the office, just by doing that, you're already sending a message. And that can be so small as not considering that sometimes you might even just switch to a virtual meeting and take a big decision there just to send out that message. And when I work with managers, I find it particularly important also to make clear that as a manager, your role, even though I always, it's clear, flexibility is everything. So we should be able to choose. But I believe that a manager, even though he'd choose to be every day in the office, should choose at least a day working from home or from anywhere else, just to give that example. And I know that even that if that person, for example, is not the person who wants to work from home, it would be sort of something that he or she does just to give the example for the team. What do you think about that? Or would you say like, no, not necessary?
I think what's most important is that we are speaking truth and speaking clearly to our team. So it's important that we're meaning what we say and that we are saying the things that are meaningful to the company. So if that manager truly just loves to be in the office all day, every day, but he truly does not have to, maybe that's an important conversation to be had, is like, I want you all to know that I'm showing up here every day because this is my most effective place to work. And I really want to reiterate that I'm not trying to set a standard subconsciously. That is not the norm or what have you. So I still vote for choice for everyone. You know, if that really is that person's best way of being, great. But it takes a little digging sometimes because we have a lot of conditioning, you know, that we have all been conditioned toward working in offices and working 9 to 5. And there's a lot of like unpacking and unwinding of that to find who we truly are inside. So I still encourage everyone to do that work for themselves, really understand things. But ultimately, as we get to know ourselves and as life evolves and changes, making those right decisions for us at that moment. But I think there's a lot of, and particularly historically, like I can think of an in-office scenario, right, where the office hours are 9 to 5, but there's this subtle thing where everyone gets in at 8:30 and people don't leave until 6:30. And if you're the one that's got your work done and at 6, you're kind of feeling like, shit, do I just sit here? And it's like this unspoken thing. And I think that stuff is really detrimental to a company's culture. And with hybrid, you know, there's a whole lot of things that could be misconstrued. And yeah, I think it's really making people feel, if you're saying that you have choice, ensuring people really do feel safe to make that choice and to execute on those choices. If you have an element where there is not choice, very clearly communicate, like, this is the thing that we are essentially not giving you choice around. We want you to come in on Thursdays and Fridays, but truly Monday to Wednesday, you're allowed to work from wherever you want. Like, being in truth and clear with our communication around what is acceptable and what's not. And if you find, as a leader, if you're having conversations behind the backs or behind closed doors of people that are things like, if this person was really committed, you know, don't you think they would be like everyone else and come into the office one day a week? Like, that speaks volumes to me. Like, no, not if you're telling them it's okay. Like, don't be really aware of these subtle norms that creep in that are not being spoken, that we're then holding people to a standard or judging them. And if that is the standard, then communicate it to them. Say, we have a lot of flexibility, but, you know, we really like it when people come in on Thursdays. And quite frankly, if you don't, we're probably going to have a hard time with that. Like, communicating that to people so that people can succeed and understand what the culture is. I can imagine that in a hybrid scenario, there can be a little bit more confusion if we're not really clear.
So transparency and explicit communication and being clear on team norms. And that's very interesting because most of the organizations that I work with, honestly, whether in presence or virtual, they do not really have explicit team norms. So nobody is really going through the process of establishing their team rules, norms, etiquette, whatever you call it, in terms of communication, collaboration, meetings, well-being.
A lot of that is actually what culture is. So when we talk about culture and culture fit, a lot of it is articulating this stuff, is then being able to be clear to people of what, like, how we like to show up every day, how we like to work together, and what is kind of acceptable and what is not. That's actually culture, and that's got nothing to do with the things we were talking about earlier of like your background or your race or your gender or whatever.
Absolutely. Sarah, you also mentioned one other thing that I would like to pick up, and that was, you mentioned several times being intentional. So being intentional about when we need to set up a meeting, being intentional about what to communicate on what channel. And I think also being intentional and everything that has to do with oneself. So we were talking a lot in a panel discussion that I had last year in Alpbach about self-leadership, self-motivation, self-organization. So being intentional on one hand, but also being aware, self-awareness with all that
Mhm.
comes with whatever comes with it, self-directed learning and all those things that are like the two new areas or skill areas that we need to develop or we need to be aware of, at least to know what we need. What would you add to particularly the part of intentional and oneself?
Yeah, I mean, I personally value this highly. One of our values, as I said, is trust and empowerment. And that really comes down to that self leadership, self inquisition, taking
Mm,
responsibility, being aware of oneself, having conversations with people about, like, what's my blind spot here? Is there something I'm not seeing? And being open to that feedback to grow and evolve. That's very important to me, and it's very important to our culture. I also see it as a trend of where business culture is going. So I think it's worth, I'm a big proponent for, like, know your culture and own it. But I
mm,
think it's also important to understand, like, trends and where they're going and what's important to people. And from my own experience, like, leading in that way and then modeling that type of behavior to a team who are then able to lead themselves in that way has been incredibly expansive. So if you're in any way a growth oriented human where you want to evolve and learn and grow, this is really, a path that will last a lifetime. Doing this inner work and looking at oneself and seeing the areas that are there for growth. I don't think it really ever goes away or stops, but it makes for a
mm,
very rich human experience and a rich experience culturally within the team, when we can show up as leaders and say, like, this is where I messed up and I see that, and kind of, I invite you guys to call me out next time you see me doing that thing or whatever. This is
mm,
what I'm growing. This is where I'm learning. This is where I'm
mm,
scared. This is where I feel like I'm succeeding. um, it's a totally different way of being, but for a team, it's very expansive. And I think what it leads to then is intentionality, where, um, for example, my leadership team and I did a deep dive a few months ago with an amazing coach, around these. I think it's called the Harrison Report or something, but it's around these, like, paradoxes that we all have. And one of mine is, so the empathy accountability paradox. And so I have very high empathy, and then I have I'm lower on the accountability scale. So I can very easily kind of understand where people are at, and empathize with their situation, and what's difficult, what's easy, what's moving, what's not. But then sometimes I slip a little bit on the accountability because my empathy is so high.
mm,
And so one of the things that I'm working on is keeping people more accountable, creating more accountability within myself and within the business. So that's something that I'm being intentional with, and is a known thing within our leadership team. And so we're all working together to support the business and me to learn this ability to keep people and keep the business and myself more accountable. So I think it's
mm,
like having that awareness and looking at oneself means we're not running away from the mistakes and the things that aren't working very well. We're bringing our awareness to them and our attention to them, so then we can be intentional with our path forward of how we can improve, up level, what have you. And so we can look at that as individuals or as the business. If we start to see culturally there's a little bit of a divide between the people who are in the office and the people who aren't, we then bring intention to how do we bridge that gap, and we have an open
mm.
conversation with everyone and say, hey, we noticed this. Like, maybe we'll do meetups, and every week you meet up, like, someone who's office based with someone who's not, or I don't know, whatever it might be. But being intentional is just like putting energy towards something that is important.
Absolutely, and I think there are so many things that we are discussing now, being in the virtual space or in a hybrid work setting, that are also discussions that whether we go back to 100% in presence, which I
Yeah.
cannot see with any company, they are so important because we sort of forgot them because we just became aware how important they are, because in the virtual space it's not working without them. It's the
Yes.
same. We see so many different and better practices now that are emerging in the discussion of virtual and hybrid meetings, that of course we need to definitely bring back into our in-presence settings as well, right?
Yeah, this was the funny thing when all of the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden a lot of people were asking me for my advice on how do we do this remotely, how do we build culture, how do we lead our teams, how do we let them know keep them accountable, all that. And I was having a really hard time with answering those questions early on, because I was thinking, how did you do it before? Like, just do the, I don't understand. And I mean, it had just been a while since I made that transition. And I guess when I made the transition, because it was something we wanted to do and we were intentional about it, it did really open up space for me to grow and evolve. But it took me a minute to kind of connect back to what that was like. But yeah, knowing who you are as a company and having standards and communicating them and being transparent and doing your work as a leader, like, we should be doing that whether we're in an office or not.
Exactly. Thanks so much. And I think those are really beautiful, fantastic closing words, because we just need to be aware that many of the standards that we're discussing now, they have been also around in the management literature for decades already. It's just we need to pick up on them and embed them again into our daily work as well. Sarah, we have here Grow Remotely. Check it out. Virtual Space Your Community. Check out Grow Remotely, whether you are a company looking for global talent or whether you are a remote job seeker. Check the platform out. And Sarah, thank you so much for taking your time, for being with us. You know that I have a virtual cocktail prepared backstage. I'm with you in a second. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Fantastic. Thank you so much also for sending your questions ahead. We are going to discuss next week. We'll continue our hybrid working series. Of course, next week we're discussing with Radina Nedyalkova from Works Advisory about hiring strategies for remote and hybrid organizations. And with that, I'm leaving you today. Thank you for being with us. Thanks for all your questions that you're also putting into the discussion always. And have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or a good night. Bye.